On May 10th, the renowned Miró String Quartet released their latest recording project on the Pentatone record label. Called Home, the album explores what home actually is, whether it be the actual physical structure we sleep in, or the surroundings we happen to be living in, or the environment that shapes us. It also explores the question of what happens when the place we feel safe in is no longer safe and you're forced to leave. With your new location, will your new location ever really feel like home compared to the one that you came from? Featuring the music of Samuel Barber, George Walker, Carolyn Shaw, and Kevin Putz, with a little bit of George Arlen thrown in, the CD Home features two large-scale works that were written specifically for the Miró Quartet. And joining me here over Zoom to talk about the album Home, I am joined by the cellist of the quartet, Josh Gindele. Hey, Josh, nice to meet you here over Zoom.
Yeah, you too. Happy to be here.
Mhm. So before we get to the disc, when I was prepping for the interview, I was doing some research about the quartet. You guys are living the life. You're touring, you're giving concerts, and you're also on faculty at the Butler School of Music at the University of Texas in Austin. Uh, all things home, you're calling Austin, I presume, home now. How long has the quartet been the quartet in residence there? And can you talk a little bit about what a year would look like for the quartet during the
Yeah,
academic
sure.
season?
Absolutely. Yeah, we have been down here for 21 years. We'll be celebrating our 30th year as a quartet next season, actually in the fall. So the bulk of our time as a string quartet has been lived down here in Austin, Texas, where we've been really well supported by the University of Texas. They brought us on as sort of a ambassador to the university because we're on tour so much, obviously recording albums, playing concerts all over the world. So our teaching is such that we don't have to be, we do no classroom teaching. We don't have large groups of students that we see at any given time, with the exception of some master classes. So we're able to kind of come and go as we please. We teach independent studios. So I have a cello studio, for example.
Mhm.
And then we coach the chamber music here at the University of Texas, all of the string chamber music. And then they allow us to kind of roam freely around the world, waving the burnt orange flag of the university and playing, whatever and whenever we choose. We do have obviously requirements to our students here at the university, so we make sure that we're not gone too long at any given time, so that we can see them at least on a somewhat regular basis.
Perfect. Uh, so this new CD Home is just fantastic. We're going to talk about the individual quartets in a bit, but in broad strokes, when it comes to the topic of home, it makes sense that an American string quartet would record compositions by American composers, and all four of the big composers on the CD have won Pulitzer Prizes. Was that planned or was that a coincidence?
It was somewhat coincidence. It was a little bit planned when we decided to add the George Walker piece to the album. It was a piece that we've been performing quite a bit, in and around the United States, especially. But honestly, especially the living Pulitzer Prize winners, they're two people that we have really close relationships with, that we love really as friends, and have such reverence for their ability to write great music for string quartets. Kevin, we've had the longest relationship with, but Caroline, we've been doing some work for the last like 4 or 5 years with, and she's just fabulous also.
Wonderful composers, both of them. Uh, there are two big works that were written for the quartet. The CD is named for Kevin Putz's string quartet, Home. How long exactly have you known Kevin Putz? And can you talk about how the composition and performance process worked and the role that the pandemic played in this whole scenario?
Yeah, sure. We've known Kevin since we came down to Austin here 21 years ago. He was on the composition faculty at the university when we first got here. He left shortly after, but we have commissioned works from him, excuse me, throughout the last 21 years. So this is our third major work of his. And the idea of home, Kevin draws upon things that he sees in the news or things happen in the world that he finds impactful. He's become quite the well-known opera composer lately. So
Mhm.
having a libretto per se, even for string quartet, is really useful for him. In this case, it was the refugee crisis in the Middle East, Iran, Iraq, all of those refugees fleeing those war-torn countries into Western Europe, into Turkey, into all the Western European countries that were accepting these immigrants. And
Mhm.
I think it was the idea for him that they were uprooting their whole lives, their religious lives, their family lives, their personal lives, to seek refuge away from these terrible things that were going on there, and what that must feel like, and what it must be like to be uprooted and in that transition, and how you must feel like you have nothing to hold on to and nothing to grasp. Um, Ironically, when we got the piece, it was the end of the summer of 2019, and we had, I believe it was 6 premieres kind of across the globe that we had to do. We managed to do the first 2 live. And
Mm,
then in March or so of 2020, as we were about to continue to do them, we were all grounded. We were all stuck at home.
right.
And the piece began for us to symbolize, I'm sitting in my home right now, what it's like to be home, what especially for a group that is so transient, moving so frequently and traveling, how important it is to have roots somewhere, have a family, have friends, have children, and just a support system. And so the piece actually took on maybe an even more important role in our lives because of that. And so it's been a piece that now has lived with us. We just played it a few weeks ago here. So 4 years later, we're still playing Kevin's works, and that's one of the great things about Kevin, is that we always know that when we commission something from him, it will live. We will get to
Mm,
play it hundreds of times. The first piece we did of his Credo, we have played we still get asked to play it. And
mm.
I believe we commissioned that in the late, geez, when was that? Maybe 2006, 2007, something like that. Almost 20 years later, we're still playing it.
Yeah, and it's very accessible. I mean, I've been listening to this since the tracks were made available. Can you quickly talk us through the 3 movements of the quartet? It really does tell a story, right?
Yeah, yeah. The opening is in C major, and C major represents home. It's that feeling of comfort. It's warm. It's sonorous. It's this beautiful, wonderful, resonant key for string quartet. And he sits there for quite a long time, sort of weaving in and out of different harmonies, but it always feels very like at peace and at home. When the second movement begins, we start to get a little bit of jagged edges. A little bit of dissonance starts to creep in, and you kind of hear this turmoil. Not both, it feels sort of psychologically like it has some turmoil, but also just in its composition, it becomes very thorny and almost kind of new 21st century classical music. And he does that on purpose. He wants to get us as far away from C major as possible. And he wants us all playing in different keys, in different rhythms at different times. One of the great things about Kevin is it never gets to the point where it's you can't comprehend what's happening.
Right.
He's so good at crafting music, even when he is so far away from consonant harmonies. There's something about it, something rhythmic. There's something about the way he uses texture that it speaks to people. And then ever so slowly, everybody starts to creep back into the C major idea. But C major is no longer the same in the last section. It has changed, just like somebody would change if they were uprooted from home and had to find themselves in a different place. In some ways, it's sort of heroic and sort of impassioned. When we get back to C major, it doesn't have quite that calmness, but it feels like it's been transformed in a way.
Yeah, there's these wonderful. When I heard it the first time, I was thinking there's these wonderful. It's reminding me of like a laser beam, like this sliding down to the fingerboard, and it sounds like he's going through the different instruments of the quartet. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, and he's just so crafty. He amazes me. I sometimes bristle because the cello parts are unusually difficult because he likes the cello to be often the same register as the violins and viola. Um, but it adds this. There's something about the sonorities of having us all in the same place registrally that makes it really special. And yes, he kind of goes back and forth from instrument to instrument, and until we all find ourselves come together back into C major, which again
Mhm.
represents home. Yeah.
Mhm. The other big work on the disc that was written for the quartet is Carolyn Shaw's Microfictions, Volume 1. These are super fun and really charming and engaging pieces. And they've got a great backstory. Can you tell us the backstory for these 6 little miniatures?
Yeah. Also, another pandemic story. Unfortunately, Caroline was writing at the height of the pandemic. She was stuck in her apartment in Brooklyn, probably on her fire escape or on her roof, as we heard of all those stories of New Yorkers and their struggles. She was uninspired because she wasn't spending time with musicians and other composers and performers. So she took to the internet and she found a science fiction author named T.R. Darling, who is using the character limits of Twitter. Well, what used to be called Twitter, now X.
X, yeah.
Yeah, right. To create short works of fiction. And she was just thought, wow, this is how she gets inspired. She's like, this is a creative who's using an outlet that I never thought to use to do something really fascinating. So there are these 6 little miniatures that she wrote, and some of them were preceded by her writing her own microfictions, and then the music came after. And as she tells it, sometimes the music came to her first. She kind of listened to it and considered it, and then wrote words to accompany it. So what I think is fascinating about the album, we actually recorded the microfictions themselves twice. Caroline is the one who appears on the album reading her own words, which is great. We also have a version where we read them as a quartet. We do that when we're traveling with the piece because we think it's important that all of Caroline's creative outlet is shown on stage, as opposed to just her music. But she has just such a charming language. And when you hear the words and in conjunction with the music, there's just something really special about how she uses language. I mean, when I say language, I mean musical language and actual language. She's a compelling and just a wonderful human being. And I'm just also just so in awe of her creativity. She's incredible.
And apparently she asks the quartet to do some rather like unusual string effects. And I was reading the booklet and you were talking about how you had to like Zoom with her and figure out exactly what she wanted. Can you talk about some of those effects?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess the most striking one is in the very last microfiction, which is a sort of we overly pressurize the string with our bow, so it feels like it kind of grinds, or it feels like it's supposed to feel like tectonic plates moving underneath us. And when we first saw it on the page, it felt like one direction from her, but Caroline is also a fabulous violinist and violist. So when we would get on Zoom, there was one time she was out on the streets of New York, and that wasn't as effective. But when she was in her apartment, and she got out her violin and kind of explained how to make the sound work, we got it. And when you hear the microfiction, the poem, and then the work, it makes a lot of sense. But on the page, it did require some doing. I mean, other than that, that's the most striking one. There's some moments where she asks us to like purposefully not play so well together, so it feels a little jumbled, a little bit of a mess. And as a classical string quartet that strives to perfect the music of Beethoven and Mozart and Haydn, that's like a tall order for us to purposely not play together, not play in tune. It really like sort of pushes against our values as a string quartet that's been working on intonation and ensemble for 30 years. But as a result, the music is wildly effective. So we'll do whatever it takes to make the story come to life. We're all in.
Yeah, the 6 microfictions are great. For me, the third one, I literally laughed out loud. It's the one where second violinist gets up and Anyway,
yes, that's a big hit on the concert stage too. Actually, is everybody cackles after that one, and it's again a bit of levity, but really smart of Caroline because there's a lot going on in the first 3. And so that's number 3.5 technically, but there's a lot going on in the first 3. So it's really easy to kind of lose track of where you are, especially with a large scale work that's multiple movements. So she just says, okay, this is where we are, and I'm going to make a little fun, and we're going to have a little fun. And she also knew that we're kind of hams, like we don't mind doing a little acting on stage. So she could trust us with it. But yeah, no, it's brilliant.
Yeah, the great pieces. On the disc, there is also one of the real cornerstones of the American string quartet literature, Barber's String Quartet, the second movement, of course, being adapted into his very well-known Adagio for strings. The Adagio has become such an icon of loss and lament for Americans, whether it be Pearl Harbor, Vietnam, 9/11, what have you.
Yeah.
Do you remember the first time you heard it? And does playing it change anything about the way you hear it for you?
I don't remember the first time I heard it. I have a recollection of playing it at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. a long time ago as a member of the quartet, and how it felt unusually impactful. I actually think that might have been pre 9/11, honestly.
Mm,
Um, but just playing it in the nation's capital, in the Library of Congress, like I just remember having a moment with that piece. Um, it's interesting because the quartet version, which is its original form, offers us a lot more opportunity to do things with it than the string orchestra version does. We can take slower tempos. We can play a lot softer, a lot more intimately. Um, it's wildly challenging actually as a string quartet because
sure.
when he did the other versions, he divided parts up. So like most of the piece, I'm playing multiple lines at the same time in the quartet version. Um, but it still just has that. It feels cathartic in a way, but also a little tragic every time we play it too,
Yeah.
because there's so many things associated with it in this country. Um, and but it's wonderful music, and unfortunately the other two movements kind of get lost in it.
That was going to be
The
my next question. Yeah. I mean, yeah, because they're
it
excellent, the other two.
They really
Hmm.
are. The first movement in particular, I think the first movement, when he conceived it, was like, okay, this is the first movement of string quartet. And I get the sense that when he wrote the adagio, he was like, okay, I just did something that I feel is exceptional. I'm going to wrap this up as quickly as I can. So the last movement's quite brief. He revisits the material from the first movement, and creates sort of a exalted, triumphant ending to it. But the first one, I think, deserves a little more credit compositionally than it gets. But it's understandable. It gets lost in a masterpiece,
Yeah.
which is the adagio. Yeah,
But it's totally excellent. The first and last movement. It's a great quartet.
yeah.
Also on the CD, there's a George Walker lyric for strings. This is coming from his first string quartet, but it was written as a memorial to his grandmother. Can you talk about how this loss of a beloved family member changes our idea of home? And is that why you included it on the CD?
You know, we included it because of its relationship to Barber's adagio. Barber and Walker knew each other. Um, I do think that there's something to be said about the presence of family in the idea of home, not just this space, but like the fact that my wife is a room away right now.
Mhm.
Um, but when you have somebody that was so important to your life, like George did, his grandmother raised him. She was the victim of slavery here in the United States. Her husband was killed. It's a very tragic story, but he lived a really supported, wonderful life with this incredible woman who had witnessed so many terrible things, yet gave him every opportunity in the world. I mean, he was the first Black graduate of the Curtis Institute of Music. He was the first African American to win a Pulitzer Prize. Unfortunately, it wasn't until the 90s, I believe, which is just
Yeah.
atrocious. Um, but so I think it's that this idea of memorial is really important, but I also think it's just a spectacular piece of music. Um, we have a recording engineer who's very particular about his likes and dislikes when it comes to music, and he I at first I don't think he was completely sold, but as we played this, he was like, this is extraordinary. This
Mhm.
is an extraordinary piece of music. This is beautiful. It is so well constructed, but you don't notice the construction because it just unfolds so effortlessly. Um, he's like, I'm really in love with this piece, and I felt that has happened with us a lot with Walker. This adagio, the lyric they call it, another piece that was taken from a string quartet and turned into a string orchestra work.
Right.
Um, on the road, we just had a lot of people like, I loved your concert, it was great, but I have never heard that George Walker piece, and it is extraordinary. Like I was, people crying in the audience, and um, it's just marvelous
Yeah.
music. Yeah,
Totally. And then almost at the end of the CD, you've got this piece of chocolate after a meal. The George Arlen over the Rainbow, arranged by William Ryden. Um, the rainbow is the epitome of home. Uh, whose idea was it to put this on the CD? And can you talk a little bit about the video that was filmed in Austin?
yeah. It was my idea just because. the Americana aspect of the album, but also I kind of liked a little bonbon at the end that everybody just knew.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody knows the adagio, right? But it felt uplifting. It felt like a really nice, lovely way to kind of wrap up an album. Um, it's a piece, honestly. This arrangement, we don't even share it with people. I don't know where it came from. We've had it for 27 or 28 years. We pull it out every so often, play it as an encore, and it's just an unbelievable arrangement. As a matter of fact, when Kevin Putz heard us play this, he goes, "Oh my God, who?" He's like, "That is the most unbelievable use of harmonic language that I've heard in a long time." Kevin's a genius when it comes to that stuff. So
Yeah.
he made me send him the score so he could like analyze some of the chord structures. Um, but so and then as a result of this recording, we decided to film this little music video, and it was kind of an homage to this place we call home. None of us are Texans, but we have called Austin home for more than 20 years. I met my wife here. My colleague Will met his wife here. John has relationships he's met here. It just felt like a fitting tribute to the city, sort of just like a thank you in a way. But it also just told a nice story because there's no place like home.
Totally.
This is our home. And we have been able to do so many extraordinary things here in Austin as a result of the community, as a result of the Butler School of Music at the university. Our colleagues, we have incredibly gifted, both performing and teaching colleagues at the university that we have gone on tour with and played concerts with. Um, it just felt like just a very natural thing to
Mhm.
do something. And we
Mhm.
filmed it at a sort of a new project here in Austin. It's called the Waterloo Greenway. It's a public space. Um, I serve on a board of directors with one of the women who runs that space. So I reached out to her and she was like, "Yes, please." And they love it too. So I'm grateful for that.
That's perfect.
Yeah, it just felt like a nice little homage. And we had never really done like a music video like that. We did a performance video years ago called Transcendence, which was a filming of us recording the great Schubert G major string quartet, but it was not cinematic or theatrical. It was just, it
Mhm.
was more documentary style. So this
Mhm.
is also kind of a fun little creative outlet for us to do something new.
Perfect. I'm going to wrap up the conversation by asking, how does it feel to finally have the disc out? And I'm presuming that you're going to be touring with this rep throughout the summer.
Yeah, it's always nice to have discs out. I will be honest, the disc has been ready for quite some time, but we have to work with release schedules with record labels, and Petstone especially, they're fabulous, but they have a lot of projects. So it's been some time coming. We actually have other albums already ready to be released, but we'll deal with that when the time comes. But yeah, we're gonna do sort of an American project. It's not going to be exactly this album, but there will be elements of it. Um, and I know we want these things to kind of live on as much as they can, and it's obviously we don't get paid to record anything anymore. That ship sailed a long time ago, and so it's just about getting this music out there, especially for me. Always my concern is making sure that these new voices are heard. Kevin, he doesn't need to be heard really. He's got lots going on for himself, but still not this piece. And Caroline, same thing. She has so much going on right now, but this is another great work of hers that deserves to be heard. And I think both these composers represent the kind of composers that we believe every audience can listen to. There,
Absolutely.
there's a certain type of composer, and we've commissioned them that we don't expect everybody to understand or enjoy. And it's a different language. It's maybe a little more esoteric, but these two, it's music of the present, and it's music that can be digested really by anybody. And
Mhm.
so the more we can get that stuff out there, the better, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. The disc is fantastic. Josh, this has been so great to meet you and talk about the Miró Quartet CD Home. Big congratulations on this fantastic CD. It's remarkable. All the best. Thanks for making the time to talk to me today and be so generous with it. And hopefully the quartet will travel north to do a tour of Canada. I know one of your violinists is from Calgary, and
Yep.
hopefully we could see you here in person here in Winnipeg. Thanks
I
again.
would. I have a former student who's a professor at Brandon.
Oh,
So I feel like I need to get up there just to
yeah,
say hi to
totally.
her. Yeah.
Who is it? Is it
Leanne Zacharias.
Leanne Zacharias? Yeah, of
Yeah,
course. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Leanne
yeah.
was my doctoral student at the University of Texas a long time ago. Yeah,
Yeah. And she's a great
yeah.
cellist. Yeah, yeah.
She fabulous. Yeah, yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah.
I just adore her. Yeah.
Thanks again, Josh. This has been
Thanks for
great.
having me. Yeah, thank you so much.